Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. On Friday morning, March the 8th, 2019, the Prime Minister or head of government of my distant native land, Finland, in Northern Europe, announced that his government would tender its resignation to the Finnish president, Mr. Sauli Niinistö, only weeks before the Finnish parliamentary elections. To be precise, 5 weeks and 2 days before the election day, the official election day, which will be April the 14th, 2019. At issue was the government's failure to reach an agreement that would have been acceptable to a parliamentary or a secure parliamentary majority over the creation of so-called social welfare and healthcare regions in Finland as a result of the decentralization reform that has been planned already for several years that would make the country's 19 provinces more prominent in the exercise of political power. And as a part of this reform, should it ever take place, the provincial governments and legislatures or councils would have a clearly or much greater role in deciding their particular forms of the social welfare and healthcare systems. However, for example, the universal nature of the Finnish healthcare system would still officially remain because the provinces have wide economic differences, especially the rather wealthy provinces of southern and western Finland compared to the clearly poorer provinces of eastern and especially northern Finland. This reform has been criticized as not being very feasible. Also, concerns have been raised in the recent months over obvious cases of neglect of elderly people spending their time or living in privately owned nursing homes, have raised fears that the full implementation of the social welfare and healthcare regions reform would mean at least the partial privatization of both the social welfare and healthcare systems, and would increase the chances that old Finns could be neglected or be too erratically and carelessly tended in these healthcare centers and especially the privately owned nursing homes. The government's position had already been precarious since June 2017, when tentatively Prime Minister Sipilä had tendered his resignation after just over 2 years in office. And at issue was the election of a hardline opponent of European Union's integration, the current immigration policies, and especially the policy of accepting immigrants from Islamic or Muslim countries. Mr. Jussi Halla-aho was elected in June 2017 as the new chairperson of the National Conservative and Populist True Finns Party. His predecessor, Mr. Timo Soini, who is the foreign minister of the outgoing cabinet and who recently announced that he would not be a candidate in the April 2019 parliamentary elections, had been more moderate or somewhat more moderate in his views than Mr. Halla-aho, who at least once has been charged with so-called hate speech, and if I remember correctly, has been fined because of controversial postings on Facebook. This split the party just about right down the middle. Its more moderate members formed the so-called Blue Future Party, which, while still being in principle national conservative and populist, is still, and Eurosceptic, is still more moderate than the mainstream sections of the True Finns party. This party is fighting hard to remain in the parliament after the April 2019 parliamentary elections and has concluded at least in 2 of Finland's 13 electoral districts, electoral alliances with another National Conservative Party. Finland has at the moment 5 National Conservative parties, more or less. The True Finns, the Blue Future, the Seven Stars movement, led by the long-term veteran centrist politician and former cabinet minister and a 4-time presidential candidate, Mr. Paavo Väyrynen. Then the Citizens Party, which ironically was founded by him, but from which he was dismissed in the spring of 2018, maybe because of personal and/or policy differences. And then there's the Finnish People First party, led by the controversial nationalist activist of Dutch origin, Mr. Marko de Witt, who lives in the large Western Finnish city of Tampere. And how exactly this National Conservative vote will influence and will succeed in the upcoming parliamentary elections is anybody's guess. Only one of these 5 National Conservative parties has a realistic chance, or an absolutely guaranteed chance, of being also in the new parliament, and that is the True Finns party. The Blue Future is fighting to remain in the parliament. The Citizens Party and the Seven Stars movement have some kind of chance, but the Finnish People First party may suffer from being ideologically difficult to distinguish from, for example, the Citizens Party and possibly the Seven Stars movement, and even possibly in some remote sense from the Blue Future. Finland has been since the 2000 constitutional reforms, which clearly reduced the presidential powers, basically a parliamentary republic, which means that the president serves, especially in foreign policy, as the ceremonial head of state. He or she neither leads the government nor even co-chairs it, like in France, nor does actively participate in its formation. He or she does formally announce to the Finnish parliament after the preliminary rounds of cabinet formation talks are over who the prime ministerial candidate is, and then the parliament votes on this person, and if he or she manages to get an absolute majority of votes, then he or she can proceed to form a new government. Prime Minister Sipilä's political position had been deteriorating because of this reform, also because of the government's very tiny and precarious majority in parliament, although even the previous government had had to limp for its last 7 months or so before the April 2015 elections, with a tiny majority in parliament after the Greens or environmentalists had left it. And of course, because of the ongoing controversies over the integration of various immigrant groups, especially those from Muslim backgrounds and nations, into Finland, and then the controversial crimes committed by a lamentable minority of especially young men from these mostly Middle Eastern or largely Middle Eastern countries, like in the northern Finnish city of Oulu. The first group of young men from immigrant backgrounds or refugee backgrounds were arrested in late November 2018, and sometime in the spring of 2019, the accused, who now number over 10, will be entering their trial in the Oulu district court. And they are accused of having sexually molested several native Finnish or Finnish-born young girls, minors. Well, in any case, what makes this move controversial is that within weeks, or maybe within only a couple of weeks, the Finnish parliament will adjourn because of the proximity of the parliamentary elections, which as I said, will take place on April the 14th, 2019. This means basically that since the government is already in a caretaker position, the opposition cannot really pass a vote of confidence against it. And because of the proximity of the elections, it makes no sense for the opposition parties to defeat the government, because the opposition parties hardly would be able to form a stable government on their own. Prime Minister Sipilä left the parliament abruptly after announcing his government's decision to resign, and went to the southern interior electoral district of Häme or Tavastia to campaign. His party is expected to drop from the first to the third place in the upcoming Finnish parliamentary elections, and it should lose, according to the latest opinion polls, to the largest opposition party, the Social Democrats, whose physically ailing leader, Mr. Antti Rinne, would then be slated to become the country's next prime minister, unless because of his health, mainly cardiac problems, he decides to take a different, lighter portfolio, like maybe that of justice minister or labor minister and so forth. And then the center-right, meaning socially liberal but economically conservative National Coalition Party. However, what will happen to the smaller parties will be interesting, because in the recent opinion polls, the Greens have been in the fourth place, followed by the National Conservative True Finns, and then the left-wing alliance composed of left-wing socialists and former communists, with also some environmentalists added in, and then some percentage points, or over 4 percentage points behind the left-wing alliance, the Swedish People's Party, which is basically a liberal ethno-linguistic party, but strongly pro-European Union, rather strongly pro-immigration and multiculturalism, and then the small Christian Democratic Party. So it will be interesting to see if the Finnish government's sudden surprise resignation will have a significant effect on the Finns' voting behavior. The advance voting will start in the first week of April 2019, and then the official election day will be on April the 14th, 2019. Cabinet crises were common in Finland, we can say, for the first 6 decades or so of the country's independence. However, since Mauno Koivisto, the late Mr. Mauno Koivisto, became the country's president in 1982 and returned to the more restrained and parliamentary use of the then great presidential powers, the cabinet crises have become less common. The last time a Finnish government officially lost a vote of confidence in parliament was back in 1958, although there have been several close calls. And then a number of governments have had to resign because of internal differences. A few or some have resigned, at least partly because of differences with presidents and so forth. Anyway, Mr. Sipilä, or Prime Minister Sipilä, took office on May the 29th, 2015, so over 3 months and over 3 years and 7 months ago. And his government officially will still be in office until after the April 2019 parliamentary elections.